Starting early as the 1950s, horror films began to depict women as monstrous beings that seemed to exceed the normality of society. The way these sci-fi magazines depicted women in this era really portrays the societal and generational differences of the time when women were thought to be less than men. Later on in the horror film franchise, the notion of damsel in distress became seemingly popular in movies. A helpless woman being stalked or watched without being able to defend herself became the norm. Thus, the term Scream Queen became an extremely popular notion in women in horror films. Seeing women never fight back, but rather scream in terror, was the societal norm of what people expected to see from women in that time. The attention to her beauty left the audience underestimating the realism of how a woman would act in this situation. Later on, starting around the 90s, the sexualization of women became a very predominant aspect of horror film culture. Ranging from shower scenes to sex kill scenes, the sexualization of women has been a dominant force in redefining horror movies in our generation. Using women's bodies as selling points for movies just to receive more publicity and viewers has become an overused tactic by a plethora of movie makers. This not only sexualizes every potential woman in a horror movie, but gives a false sense that you need to be a gorgeous blonde to be a big part in a scary movie. Many horror films tend to portray the cliche of a nerdy virgin who almost always outlasts the killer, and the dumb ditzy blonde who tends to go towards the screams rather than away. In recent years, horror filmmakers have done an excellent job breaking this cliche and giving women in horror true power and are no longer helpless. In this new generation of movies, you see more of an independent thinking woman who defies modern horror conventions by not investigating strange noises or walking alone, but by simply being a strong independent woman. Movies such as Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween are all examples of films that have these final girls, also known as the heroines of the film. This became a largely epidemic throughout horror films and directly to teen slashers starting from as early as the 80s. Lastly, the category of horror films where the woman in the film is either evil or monstrous in some form of way. In many aspects, these types of films almost mimic what sci-fi films did in the 50s, where they depicted women as inherently evil or dangerous. Seen largely in Japanese horror film culture, women are most often seen as dark entities when they die and often come back for revenge for the wrongdoings done to them. These films not only show a gorier side to women, but a more realistic side to horror. So in conclusion, I've talked to you about the horror films and showed you how they've depicted and objectified women throughout the decades, and how each generation has toned their own biases into these movies. I've come to notice that these types of movies not only objectify women, but blatantly are sexist, saying women are only good enough to be looked at half naked and terrified of a man. The only question I could leave with is what if every female character in horror movies was replaced with a male? Things would look a lot different.